The accepted history says Chevrolet's small block is the greatest American V8 ever built. But in 1953, Buick launched GM's first overhead valve V8, an engine that produced 15% more torque and beat a small block Corvette to 60. Carroll Shelby praised it by name. Then GM buried it over $34 a unit. How that engine came to life and why it was erased begins with one engineer's radical bet. Joe Turley's name doesn't often appear in the usual GM histories, but in 1953 his engineering team delivered something that broke the mold. Buick's new V8 wasn't just another post-war power plant, it was the company's first true overhead valve design, and the first in General Motors to reach production with this architecture. The press kit that October called it the Fireball V8. But inside Buick, engineers had other names, the vertical valve, or more pointedly, the Nailhead. The heart of Turley's breakthrough lay in the cylinder heads. Instead of the wide, canted valves favored by rivals, the Nailhead arranged its intake and exhaust valves nearly straight up and down, narrow, almost stubby, like the heads of nails. This geometry wasn't a styling quirk. It allowed the combustion chamber to be far more compact than any of its contemporaries, squeezing the air-fuel mixture tight and burning it fast. The result was a measured thermal efficiency of 78%, a figure Turley recorded in his 1953 memo, compared to 72% for the Chevrolet 265 and 73% for Chrysler's vaunted Hemi. Factory drawings show a 322 cubic inch block running a 10.5 to 1 compression ratio, aggressive numbers for the time. The engine delivered 188 horsepower at 4,600 RPM and, more importantly, 285 pound-feet of torque at just 3,000 RPM. On the spec sheet, it outclassed anything in its price bracket. Buick's own engineers boasted that the Nailhead could produce more than 1 foot-pound of torque per cubic inch, a claim Motor Trend's dynamometer would soon validate. For a brief moment, the technical arc of American V8s bent toward Buick, and it was Turley's vertical valves that made it possible. Numbers told the story better than any sales pitch. On Motor Trend's dynamometer, the Buick Nailhead's torque curve didn't just look impressive, it crushed the competition where it mattered. The 322 cubic inch Nailhead delivered 285 pound-feet at just 3,000 revolutions per minute, a figure that left the Chevrolet 265 small block trailing by nearly 15% in real-world grunt. Even Chrysler's vaunted Hemi, with all its racing pedigree, lagged behind the Nailhead below 2,500 revolutions per minute. The Cadillac V8, though close in peak numbers, needed more displacement and higher revs to match the Buick's effortless surge. Out on the street, this translated into acceleration that embarrassed the so-called performance leaders. Period road tests clocked the 1956 Buick Century, powered by the Nailhead, at 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 10 seconds. That was quicker than a base Corvette running the small block, and it wasn't lost on the engineers or the press. Motor Trend's testers noted the Nailhead's broad torque plateau, calling it the most usable power in its class. Carroll Shelby, who built his reputation on wringing the most from American engines, singled out the Nailhead in a 1960 interview. "If you want torque you look at the Buick." For drivers, that meant a surge of power with every touch of the pedal, no need to wind the engine out or chase horsepower numbers on paper. The Nailhead's advantage was never theoretical. It was a force you could feel from the first stoplight to the top of the hill, and the evidence was stamped on every dyno chart and every quarter-mile slip. Yet even as the Nailhead rewrote expectations for what a production V8 could do, a limitation was lurking. Buick's engineers knew the same vertical valve geometry that delivered so much torque would soon run up against a wall at higher revolutions per minute, a wall that would define the next chapter in the engine's story. Buried in Buick's engineering files from 1957 sits a memo that changed the entire trajectory of the Nailhead V8. The document, stamped confidential, laid out a hard truth. The celebrated vertical valve heads, so efficient at producing low-end torque, were choking the engine above 5,000 RPM. Testing revealed that airflow through the intake and exhaust ports simply couldn't keep up as revs climbed. The torque that made the Nailhead king at stoplights faded away at higher speeds, where rival engines with wider, canted valves began to pull ahead. Inside the engineering bullpen, the mood shifted from pride to urgency. Joe Turley's team calculated that a redesign, larger ports, revised valve angles, and new castings could break the ceiling. The fix wouldn't come cheap. The estimate, $2 million just for the heads and the necessary tooling. That was a staggering sum for a single division, especially in an era when every dollar spent on engines had to be justified to the Central Finance Committee. Buick's proposal didn't just ask for money, it demanded a leap of faith that the Nailhead could evolve and hold its ground against the rising tide of high-revving V8s from both inside and outside GM. The memo didn't just expose a technical flaw, it forced a choice: invest in the Nailhead's future or let the breathing limit define its fate. In the months that followed, engineering arguments clashed with corporate caution. The $2 million figure became a lightning rod, drawing scrutiny from the accountants and igniting a debate that would reach the highest levels of GM's decision-making. For the first time, the Nailhead's future was at risk, not from the competition, but from within its own parent company. April 12, 1955. In a stuffy boardroom at General Motors headquarters, the fate of Buick's Nailhead V8 came down to a number scribbled on a cost sheet: $34. The GM Finance Committee, led by senior accountant Earl F. Miller, gathered to weigh the future of the division's most advanced engine against the relentless logic of corporate arithmetic. The proposed fix, a new set of high-flow heads to cure the Nailhead's breathing problem, carried a $2 million price tag, but Miller's focus was narrower: the per-unit cost. Project 400, the all-new V8 platform in development, promised a $34 savings on every car compared to the Nailhead. That figure, drawn from internal cost breakdowns, included shared castings, common machining, and a streamlined supply chain stretching across Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Oldsmobile. One committee minute reads, "The market will not reward a specialty engine that adds $34 per vehicle. The savings from Project 400 are not theoretical, they are bankable." The engineers in the room, some of whom had spent years chasing every last foot-pound from the Nailhead, watched as their arguments for torque, efficiency, and real-world performance were reduced to a line item. The committee's decision was unanimous: the redesign was dead. Miller, never one for sentiment, summed it up in a memo: "Shareholders will not pay for a marginal power increase when the standard engine can be built for less." That April vote didn't just kill a technical solution, it buried the promise of an engine that had, by every measure except cost, outperformed its rivals. For the Nailhead, the corporate veto was final. The future belonged to the small block, and the $34 savings became the price of progress at General Motors. In the spring of 1960, a signed contract crossed the Atlantic, carrying with it the blueprints for the very engine GM had just sidelined. British Leyland, searching for a robust V8 to power its next generation of Land Rover models, paid £150,000 up front and agreed to a 2% royalty for every engine built. The deal included Buick's core casting dies, camshaft specs, and most importantly, the Nailhead's unique vertical valve cylinder head geometry. Inside the Land Rover engineering department, the reaction was immediate. Technical notes from the Series 3 project praised the Nailhead's torque, calling it superior to any domestic British V8 for off-road work. The vertical valve arrangement, once dismissed as a liability by GM accountants, became the very feature that let Land Rover conquer muddy slopes and rocky trails. Rover engineers kept the heart of the Nailhead intact, its narrow combustion chambers and external balance, while adapting it for British manufacturing. The result was an engine that delivered 440 pound-feet of torque in modern dyno testing, a figure that astonished even the most skeptical Rover enthusiasts. In 2023, a freshly rebuilt Nailhead, run on a Dyno 6000 at Mars Performance in the UK, posted numbers that matched or exceeded the factory's original claims. One historian summed it up simply: GM buried the Nailhead, but British engineers gave it a second life. The engine that American finance wrote off became the backbone of Britain's most enduring off-road legend. For every Land Rover that clawed its way up a hillside, the ghost of Joe Turley's design kept pulling, proof that real engineering value doesn't vanish just because a corporation moves on. Right now, engineering brilliance still loses to corporate conformity. The Nailhead produced more torque per cubic inch than any GM rival and outpaced the Corvette to 60, yet a $34 committee veto erased it. Today, real innovation can vanish for less. What else are we leaving on the table?